Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to see what is GraphQL, what is the advantage of using the GraphQL over the REST API. Okay, so what is GraphQL? GraphQL is the query language. What is query language? So we all know that in the database. So I have a MySQL database in my local. So I have a table called student. Select star from student. I'm querying this table and I'm getting these many results. Okay, so there are total 12 records are there. Okay, so but I don't want all the 12 records to be in the result. Okay, so I want only the students those are studying in a triple department. So what I have to do is I need to specify the condition inside the where class. So where department equal to triple E. Okay, so now I'll get the students only those are studying in triple E department. So now I got the 5 records. I want to add one more condition like the students those have got mark 56. Those are having the mark 56. Okay, so I need to add one more condition like mark equal to 56. Okay, so I am adding the conditions inside the where class in order to restrict the number of records it can be returned, right? So this is called the query language. So we are querying the table with the where class condition. So based on the condition we specified inside the where class, the number of records in the result set getting changed. In the same way, using the GraphQL, we'll be able to change the number of fields in the response. Okay, so that is why it is called the query language. We'll be able to understand that when we started coding. Okay, so we'll see it in the next video. And the second one is server side runtime for client APIs. What is server side runtime? Server side runtime is nothing but the server side application. The GraphQL is the framework which is deployed on the server side. Okay, that's why it's called as a server side runtime. When you send the request, it will go to the GraphQL which is part of the server side, and that will process the request and send the response. Okay. Also, this GraphQL is an alternative for the REST API. So whatever the operations that you can do with the REST endpoint, the same you can do with the GraphQL. So we know that, right? There are few HTTP methods: get, post, put, delete. So all these operations will be able to. There are few more methods also there: put method, delete method, options. So all these HTTP methods we can implement using GraphQL also. So it is an alternate to the REST API. Gives API clients exactly the data they requested for. What does it mean? So consider that I have a student table. So the student table having 5 columns, right? Roll number, name, department, mark. So let's see, I have an object, student object. This student object have 5 fields: roll number, name, department, and mark. So all these 5 fields I'm fetching from this student table. Okay, so the response will be look like this: student. So I am returning the array of students. Okay, so it will have the roll number, name, department, and mark. Okay, consider I have only one record in the table. Okay, but I don't want to get all the fields in the response. I need only the roll number and the name. So in that condition, what you will be doing, you need to create the separate endpoint, right? But in the case of GraphQL, you don't need to do that. You just need to change the field names in the request itself. In the request payload itself, you need to specify the fields or the field names that you wanted in the response. It is gives exactly the data the client is requested for. The client is nothing but the user. The user wants only, so we have 5 fields. The user want only the 2 fields like roll number and name. So in that case, they have to specify those field names in the request. So we don't have to write the separate endpoint and write the business logic to fetch those data from the database. So we can avoid the duplicate coding. We can avoid that additional coding. if you use the GraphQL. So why this GraphQL is being used over the REST endpoint? The first one is the main advantage is the performance. So the performance of the GraphQL is far better than the REST endpoint when we are dealing with a large volume of complex data. Okay, so for example, so in this example, I have only five columns in the table, and this REST endpoint is fetching only five records, only few records, right? Totally 12 records are in the table. But in the real-time program, we will be having hundreds of fields, right? We might be getting the hundreds of fields from the endpoint, and it might be a complex record, like one object can be embedded with another object, so we'll be getting the huge volume of the JSON response, huge volume of data you have to deal with in the real time. So the response object also will be looks very huge, right? Very verbose. But the client side, they are not going to process all the fields, right? They wanted to process only the specific fields. Okay, so in that case, what happens? Unnecessarily, we are fetching the additional records, additional columns, additional records from the table, which leads to the performance issue, which can be avoided if you use the GraphQL, because in the GraphQL, you can control the fields that you wanted in the response. You can specify or define the fields that you wanted in the response in the request payload itself. So that's why the performance of the GraphQL is better than REST endpoint. And to avoid overfetching and underfetching. So the same, right? So as I said, so this one is returning four fields, right? But I don't want to get all four fields. I want only the roll number and the name of the student. So in that case, what we have to do? We need to create the separate endpoint, right? So here we have an endpoint called v1 students. It returns all four fields, but I don't want all these four fields in the response. I want only the roll number and name. So that you need to add one more endpoint, and you need to create the separate method for that, and you need to fetch the data from the these data from the database. So in this case, you need to create the separate endpoints in order to handle that, right? For that specifically, in the future I might need one more field in the response. So in that case, you cannot use the same existing endpoint. This service might be exposed to the multiple clients, I mean the multiple applications. If you change the data type or the field name in the one application, it might be impacting them, right? So as per the REST endpoint recommended principle, it's not good to change anything on the endpoint. It's always better to create the new endpoint. So in that case, you are keep adding as you keep adding the field, you need to add the additional endpoints as per your requirement. If you want to add the one more field to the existing response, you need to create the separate endpoint. Or if you want to remove the response from the existing response data, then you need to add another endpoint. So you keep adding the endpoint as data grows. So this is another headache, right? So so that this problem also we can avoid when we use the GraphQL. And to specify the response structure at the client side itself. So this is what I said earlier, right? If you want only the roll number and the name, you can specify this in the request payload itself. You don't need to do any server side any changes on the server side. I mean the Java controller class on the Java code. Okay. And then it's a single endpoint. So GraphQL is capable of handling all the requests with a single endpoint, all type of requests. It could be a fetch request, I mean the get endpoint, it could be a fetch request or update request, or it could be a delete request. All this kind of requests can be handled in the single endpoint. Okay, and no versioning is needed. So the same thing, we already see that, right? So we need to, as we if we want to change the fields in the response, or if we want to add the new fields to the response, or if you want to remove a few fields from the response, you need to keep adding the endpoints, new endpoint. You need to create the new endpoint for every time. So which is not required. But in the GraphQL GraphQL can handle everything in a single endpoint, so we don't need to create the different version of endpoint every time when the response getting changed. Okay, so these are all the advantage of using the GraphQL over the REST endpoint. So in the next video, we are going to see how to implement the GraphQL API in Spring Boot application. Thank you.